Welcome to Balco's AIA Continuing Education series. Today's AIA course is titled Parking Garage Expansion Joint Covers. This course has been approved for one learning unit for health, safety, and welfare with the American Institute of Architects. Balco is part of the Engineered Building Solutions Group, a segment of CSW Industrials. The EBS group unites Balco, Metacock, SmokeGuard, and Greco. These four leading brands provide innovative, safety-focused solutions for architects, building owners, engineers, and contractors with a shared commitment to life safety by design. Balco manufactures high-performance architectural construction products for the commercial market, which includes a full line of expansion joints, egress systems, fire-stopping products, and much more. You can view our full line of building products at balcousa.com. Balco is a registered provider with the American Institute of Architects CES program. This course is approved and in compliance with AIA. This program is not intended to promote any specific construction material or method of use. At the completion of this video course, you will need to take our 10-question test and get 70% correct to receive your AIA Certificate of Completion. You will receive your certificate via email. If you are an AIA member and you provided your AIA member number, we will report your course completion to AIA CES records. Please allow for up to 10 business days to report credit to AIA. This presentation is copyrighted by Balco. Any reproduction, distribution, display, or use is prohibited without written permission. This course explains how to understand and apply performance specifications to ensure longevity and life safety. You'll learn how to inspect expansion joint systems, provide continuing care, explore categories of expansion joint parking products, and how to identify and remediate damaged sections while maintaining continuity of design. The course also covers key steps and timetables for renovating expansion joints in existing garages. Today's presentation was recorded by Steve Cooper. Steve is Vice President of Promotions and Training for Balco. Steve works directly with architects, specifiers, and distributors on product education and project specifications. With that, let's turn it over to Steve.
So we're going to be talking about parking garage expansion joint covers, and we're going to begin with design and then move on to maintenance and restoration. So good design begins with education and attention to details. Consider the application, define traffic conditions, loads, speeds, frequency, determine the movement criteria, thermal, seismic, wind, what's going to be affecting the movement of your structure, and reduce noise due to the proximity to public areas like maybe an adjacent apartment building, or maybe there's a roadway or something like that that's near where you're doing your design work. So what should a good expansion joint cover system accomplish in a parking garage? Well, the primary reason they're there is to handle specified movement of the structure. But we also have a lot of things to consider in terms of performance, like load capacity, water integrity, fire protection for any adjacent structures in the structure itself, sound reduction, and smooth traffic crossing. So one of the ways that we take care of this is we consider all these environmental factors. When you're pouring a concrete for a parking garage, which is a large construction segment that is highly affected by temperature change and curing of concrete, it's best to consult with a manufacturing firm and an engineering firm to make sure that the movement that's related to the structure is also in line with the products that's chosen that has the right kind of movement for that structure. So you want to make sure that the two align. So I'll give you an example of these, the one type of these structures where you really need to pay attention to the environmental considerations, and that is this diagram of a Texas wrap. So the premise is that there's a parking garage that's basically freestanding, but built all around the perimeter is a series of construction projects that would be related to either commercial or residential, like multifamily or something like that. And they're all connected together. And there's that red rectangle that you see there is the expansion joint cover that happens between the parking garage and the structure. So we want to pay close attention to how we treat that, keep it waterproof, allow it to move, keep the fire where it starts out and don't let it move around and through the structure. So we want to make sure we pay attention to all those kinds of things, in addition to all of the harsh elements like rain and sun and all that sort of thing that we contend with in these types of applications. So environmental concerns, concrete in winter versus summer. So concrete expands in the summer, which makes the expansion joint gap get smaller, and concrete shrinks in the winter, which makes the joint gap get larger. So the timing of the concrete pour should be coordinated with the joint cover material that's being applied in that. And like elastomeric systems allow for a wider percentage of movement due to the smaller joint size. So if you have a small expansion joint opening, the amount of expansion and contraction of concrete has a greater effect, but the elastomeric seals are very good about taking up these kinds of forgiveness for variables in the width of the joint due to the temperature changes. Metal systems are typically in larger expansion joint gaps. And so even though there is a certain amount of movement that's happening in concrete as it grows and shrinks in the hot and the cold, in the larger joint applications, that's minimized by the width of the joint that is being placed in. So in both cases, you really have less to worry about than you think you do when it comes to the amount of concrete growth and shrinking due to thermal conditions. So we really have taken most of that into account, whether you have an elastomeric system or a metal system that you're putting in your garage. Load capacities and those kinds of requirements, it's best practice to state what your load patch is for the type of construction going on there and what kind of equipment is going to be crossing through your garage. So you may have an industrial complex where you might have pallet jacks going in and out of there. So you have different types of pallet jack loading. Forklifts are common, class 2, class 3 forklifts. Scissor lifts for repair and changing lights and fixing electrical equipment and things of that nature may be going through there. Slow vehicular traffic in a parking garage is most common. An HS20 vehicular traffic might be, let's say you have a parking garage where you've got an entry lane coming through an airport. So there's higher speed traffic coming up to the garage, and then it slows down once it gets into the garage. All of these may have different factors in the kinds of products that you choose, but it's best to know what the load area is, the length and width of the area, and the amount of loading that's being applied to those, so we can select proper products for those. This particular project is the Jorge Chavez Airport in Lima, Peru. So this is a 30-inch wide expansion joint with a 62-inch wide cover plate. So quite a large system. So these can be pretty robust. And in that, we have a lot of considerations for movement. This had a 100% maximum open movement and a 90% closed movement. And so that's very important. Why 100% and 90%? Well, the 90% is because there are elements of the construction and the expansion joint cover system that go into the throat of the expansion joint gap, which take up some amount of space. So we need to make sure that we coordinate. If you think you want to have 100% open and 100% closed, you may have to make the joint a little bit bigger than you thought you would to start out with to make room for things like fire barriers, water barriers, metal framing, and things of that nature that might be inside the joint openings. So you may have to upsize the width of the joint so that you can make room for all those internal components. Water management is extremely important. In elastomeric systems, they're generally controlled by the seals themselves that are installed in the structure. In larger systems where you have metal plates and metal expansion joint cover systems, generally speaking, you have a moisture control system that's generally a water barrier that could be made of different materials like EPDM or TPO or other kind of flexible materials like that. But all of those change directions. They move horizontally and vertically. They change directions in the same plane. And you need to have good instructions on how to make sure that all these remain watertight. And you may wish to have drains placed. So you may want to control where you want the water to go. So it's not just sloping through the garage. It may be that you want to put a plumbing connection in there that you can drop between a column so that it's hidden from the public view, but you're controlling the water evacuation and sending it wherever you want it to go, to drains in the basement, or whether you're sending it out to planters in the outside of the structure, or whatever mechanism you want to use to evacuate the water. Fire ratings. So standalone parking garages are currently exempt from fire barrier requirements in the expansion joint application. That's a standalone garage. But other items like fire stop penetrations are now part of the code. And it is in code discussions currently to look at putting the fire ratings into the expansion joint applications in the garages. But if a garage is connected to another structure, like a residential structure or a commercial structure or something like that, then you're going to have fire barrier requirements where those two meet, where the garage meets the commercial condition anyway. So it's good to be up on the codes and the requirements for expansion joint fire rating. And one of the discussions that's taking place now is also the EV and alternative fuel, like lithium ion batteries and hydrogen and things of that nature. Those burn different they have a faster burn and a hotter burn for a different period of time than what most construction materials that have traditionally been placed in buildings. And so these discussions are taking place that it may affect the fire rating of those kinds of areas in standalone parking structures, as well as structures that are connected to commercial properties. When you're looking at fires and the casualties and things that are associated with that, it's generally speaking, it's smoke that is the culprit that causes the majority of fatalities. There's been a lot of studies done here. This one's done by John Hall Jr. of the NFPA, the National Fire Protection Agency. And the short version is that smoke does travel with some speed. It travels about 3 to 5 miles an hour, which is a walking pace to a brisk jogging pace for most people, which is okay if you're outside on a track or you're inside a gym on a treadmill, but it's not okay if you're with a crowd of people with sight visibility reduced because of the smoke and you're trying to egress folks through a confined area. Then that speed is not practical, and then so you have overcome with smoke. So it's best to be able to keep the smoke travel contained in certain areas so that it doesn't spread throughout the structure. Another thing that we want to reduce is sound transfer. So if you have a parking garage next to an apartment or something like that, no one wants to hear that clank clank when people are driving over a metal cover or something like that in the garage, and they hear that in their apartment. And so sound dampening is important. So one, of course, we want to rely on sound dampening as a part of the structure itself, but it's best practice to make sure that we take care of that sound reduction in the expansion joint covers themselves on the parking garage. And so in that, we use different kinds of measures for that. So there's two measures that are most frequently used. In a parking garage, the most common is the OITC, which is the outdoor to indoor sound transfer. So obviously from an outdoor garage or a drive lane to a building, right? So the whole idea is to reduce the amount of decibels coming from the subject where the noise is to the pedestrians that are hearing this noise. And then there's another indoor to indoor noise that's not as applicable to parking garages, but it's a sound transfer class. So the idea is you want to reduce it down to an acceptable level. So you want to get your ratings. Let's say use STC for an example. You want to be at a minimum of a 50 reduction, which is, you would faintly hear sounds. A 60 would be like you could, if there's a loud noise outside, you wouldn't hear it inside, like shouting or hammering or something like that. And then if you had a 70 reduction, which is extremely high, there would be basically, you wouldn't hear any change from a high level of decibels outside to inside. Most of what we target is going to be in the 50 to 60 range for reduction. And so how do we make these reductions? Well, there's a few different ways that we do this in parking garages. If you look at the top left, if you have an extruded expansion joint cover system, then generally speaking, there are components made into it so that you can put gaskets in place, and gaskets can be made out of any kind of rubber material or different materials like that. But they are between the cover plate and the concrete or whatever there's steel or whatever it is they're sitting on. So it creates a sound reduction. On the top right, cover plates can make a loud clanking noise from metal like aluminum to aluminum. So EPDM barriers are placed on the bottoms of the plates to keep that sound from transferring from one plate to the other. It just absorbs all that sound in that rubber sheet material that's adhered to the plate. You can encapsulate a steel plate or something like that completely in a rubber coating, like the bottom left, or on the bottom right. You can place your metal cover on top of elastomeric materials like EPDM reinforced rubber, like conveyor belt type materials, things of that nature, that you can fasten into place that absorb that sound. And all of these things, being rubber, are pliable, so they also allow for some vertical compression and things of that nature. So they allow some, beyond just the sound help, they actually allow for some motion vertically and as a result of loads being applied to the parking deck. So as a rule of thumb, elastomeric products are in smaller joints, and metal covers are in larger joints. And so how does that look? Well, that line is about the 4-inch line. That's kind of a magic segment that is most common throughout construction. And 4 inches is an area in parking garages that a car tire can span both sides of a 4-inch gap. So it can be completely supported from one side of concrete to the other side of the concrete. So the rubber is really not holding the car up or anything like that. But when the joint gets to be larger than that, especially when it moves 50% and the maximum opening is 6 inches, 7 inches, 8 inches, whatever, it gets pretty large. Then you have a much heavier load because the weight of the tire is pressing down with the whole weight on the system. And so you need a metal cover plate when you get to that. So the 4 inches is the kind of the magic line. So pick elastomerics in your 4-inch or under, pick metal when you get above 4 inches. So here's some examples of some of the elastomeric kinds of systems that are most commonly used in parking garages. The top left is what's called a wing seal. So you can see those two pictures there, and that gives you an idea. The far left top picture is a wing seal that is a floor-to-floor application, and the one next to it is a wing seal that is in a floor to probably a column or a wall application. And so there's a 90-degree segment right there. But these are made to line up with each other so that you continue your waterproofing. You can see that there is a rubber kind of a gasket there, and it's got flanges off to the side. That's why they call it a wing seal. They call those flanges wings. And that's filled with an elastomeric concrete material that absorbs shock, and it allows you to bond this system to the concrete and allow automobile traffic without having any mechanical attachments to the concrete. You don't have to drill any holes or put any fasteners, which is really good for post-tension concrete applications, which is common in a lot of parking garages. So it's very, very attractive to not have to put screws and anchors and drill holes into your concrete. The top right picture is a compression seal, epoxy bonded seal that is installed completely into the opening of the expansion joint gap. And so there's no block out and there's no wings or anything like that. It's just epoxied into place, and the car drives across the top of it, and it completely sealed. And all of these keep the water from working its way through the openings. The bottom left is a snowplow system. It's kind of like a wing seal. It's very similar to a wing seal system, but there's two very heavy-duty rubber members in place that do get bolted into the upper deck, where you would have snowplow traffic and things like that, so that snowplows blades would just bounce off of that thick, dense rubber steel reinforced plate so that it doesn't damage or get into the seal and tear it open and create a water leak of some kind. And then the bottom right two pictures is where you have a structural slab with a topping slab or pavers or something like that on the surface of it. So those can be variable depths and things of that nature, but those are generally consist of a belt and suspenders kind of an approach, where you have an elastomeric gutter on the structural level of the concrete, and then at the topping slab level there's a secondary seal that is mudded or heated into the topping slab material for waterproofing. And so the wing seals are very durable. They handle automobile traffic very, very well. These are the most common types of applications that we see in parking garages. Metal systems, it's best if you can recess the product into a blockout. And so one of the things that we try to do is, if you're going to recess into a blockout, it's best practice to try to keep that as shallow as possible. So the top left picture and the middle picture there all illustrate a shallow blockout system that is about 3/4 of an inch deep, that allows you to have pretty minimal penetration into the concrete depth, so that when you apply your anchors to hold it in place, it has less of a chance of interfering with any kind of rebar or post-tension cables or things of that nature. It's still best to X-ray your concrete to make sure that you're avoiding and getting in between those kinds of members so that you stay as far away from them as possible. We try to keep that level as high as possible to keep that interference to a minimum. In the bottom right are a couple of other examples of different types of systems that are blocked out into the concrete slab that can allow for things like elastomeric concrete to be used as a shock absorbing material on the edges, especially for very, very wide, large joints, and steel plates for very heavy duty applications that would be industrial. So if you had a parking garage that was in and out of a warehouse, an industrial warehouse, and maybe inside the warehouse has expansion joints, and the parking garage does too, you have a thick, heavy duty steel plate that can take some serious abuse and deflect those pallets and things of that nature off of it so that you don't have damaged materials. One of the most key elements to a expansion joint cover system that is metal is in a parking garage is to have a centering mechanism that has a spring shock absorbing component to it. And so this particular spring bar system has got a coil spring in it, and there's a cone-shaped piece at the top that allows you to sort of guide your anchoring from the cover plate down into the spring, which gives it an alignment, and it pulls it all together, and then you anchor it down, and that provides tension relief. So when automobiles drive across the cover plate, the anchor, the screw in the center of the plate, gets some relief. As the plate shifts and moves, it has a little bit of relief, so it doesn't stress the head of the screws, which can cause them to snap off. If you just anchor tightly a screw to the cover plate, then you could, when a car hits from the side of the cover plate, it can cause damage to that anchor over time. So this relieves all that, allows this to last a very, very long time. Sometimes you can't block out. You just have, maybe you've got a retrofit application and you've got to install your system on the surface of the concrete in your parking garage. Well, in that case, it's best if you can keep the bevels on the edges of the concrete to a very low, slight slope. Generally speaking, there are 2-to-1 bevels up to a ½ inch thick plate. And so you can mount that to the surface and create a minimal amount of anchoring. And you have hinges in some of these plates that allow for some really good movement in multiple directions. In this particular case, where you have a sort of a live hinge built into the system, so there's more than one component to the cover surface mounted cover plate. There's a hinge that if you have that next to a column or a wall or something of that nature, if those move in shear, so not just in your normal expansion and contraction, but let's say that your building moves side to side, and at the joint it's moving opposite directions, this allows for the stress relief at that location. Where if you have just a cover plate, or you've got a rubber encapsulated plate, then stress can be placed on that when those shear in different directions, and it can actually tear that hinge or stress it or pop the screw heads off or something of that nature when it puts a lot of stress on it. So these hinges really do a good job of allowing for shear motion in your structure. Now, inside the parking garages or where they enter into other commercial space, you'll have wall covers, maybe ceiling covers, things of that nature. So these can be elastomeric, or they can be metal. They can be a lot of different types of things. Generally speaking, they don't have to do a lot of water control, but they can be provided with water control so that you can move water from maybe it comes from a roof line and you trap it inside the expansion joint opening and funnel it down to a gutter system that you can then control to a drain or control to the outside of the structure. When you do have to fire rate a parking garage expansion joint cover system, we try to make sure that we keep the fire barrier from interfering with the joint cover system. So the important piece of that is you do not want anything interfering with the waterproofing layer. So generally speaking, the waterproofing of an expansion joint cover system is going to be at the top level of the floor, of whatever that concrete floor surface is, whether that's the roof level or any other level in there. We move the fire barriers to be down below it. So we can, if it's an elastomeric seal, then we have fire barriers that are friction held into place, or maybe they're in place with glue or epoxy, so that there's no mechanical attachment and there's no interference of the fire barrier with the seal. And if you have a metal expansion joint cover system, you can install those from underneath the slab And so if there's a listed tested design for that, you can install it from underneath the slab so that you keep completely separated the waterproofing layer from the fireproofing layer. So you have no chance of interfering with the waterproofing. So maintenance. So good maintenance begins with training, periodic inspections of the joint covers. You want to look at them from above and below. So you want to stand on top of the joint cover and look for things. You want to get below it and look for things. And you're looking for things like broken fasteners, loose plates, leaks that you might be seeing coming through the system. That would be looking from below. Check for the surrounding construction for cracks. Do you have major cracking going on at the expansion joint location in your concrete? Torn or distressed seals and gaskets. Bowed cover plates. Are your cover plates dished in so that you can tell that the cars driving over it are bending the plate, so that you may have a plate that's undersized for the load action that's going on there. Maybe you intended an automobile to be driving across it, but now you've got fire trucks or ambulances or something going over it that are much heavier and higher PSI in the tires and heavier load vehicles, or maybe they're using pallet jacks or forklifts in an area where you had an automobile design and you're having some failures of that cover plate. So it's good to identify those kinds of things in routine inspections. And large separation between butted plates. If your plates are spaced apart from each other and there's no kind of a splice control system that keeps the plates aligned with each other, and they scoot really far apart because cars are turning and changing directions on the plates or things of that nature, then you could have a safety concern where if it gets wide enough apart, a person can step their foot into a gap between two plates. So you want to make sure that you're looking to ensure that those plates are properly connected at the splice points. And then, any kind of visibility that you can see from the decks below you. And so how do we conduct these kinds of trainings? Well, one, we conduct training for contractors and subcontractors. And one of the ways we do that is to make sure that we have a good program in place. It's comprehensive. Is we use associations, like in this case, the Cement Waterproofing Restoration Institute validated training programs. As manufacturers, we go through a series of trainings so that we can get certified to deliver these kinds of trainings with a validated certificate from these kinds of groups. And they look at overview of the expansion joint applications. They look at safety. It's a very big piece of what we do in there. Safety in installation and safety afterwards. Material science. How are these things made? How do we know that they're compatible with your deck and your deck coating and whatever else? We do lots of demonstrations, plans and specifications to make sure that we have the planning in place to get this done properly. It's specified properly up front. The plans and the shop drawings and all those sort of things line up so that we have a good finished product and there's a good plan in place. There's a lot of hands-on installation, so a lot of mock-ups. Sometimes they're field mock-ups, sometimes they're factory mock-ups, and to make sure that the installers know how to handle these materials. Quality control to make sure that your end result is correct, and then testing and evaluation for factory training. Some of the steps that we use to make sure that we have a properly installed expansion joint at the end of these is site meetings, right? Lots of site meetings. So there's a lot of mobilization discussions, a lot of concrete pour discussions to determine what the block out width and depth need to be, what kind of materials are going to be in place, where you're going to store these materials indoors or outdoors, all those things like that. Field measuring is very important to make sure that you measure before you order materials so that you have what you need when you get out there for your installation. And then addressing all the directional changes that happen in there. It's very easy to sometimes to put in the straight links and then you come to the corners and you're trying to figure out, well, how do I actually make this work? Do we actually have proper instruction? And so materials and methods in terms of installation, lots of training to make sure that we know how to install these materials and make these transitions and changes, and to keep your concrete surface clean. So when we do the installation, that when we peel away all of the preparation materials that have been used to protect that joint, that you have a nice, clean, finished installation at the end of it, so that you don't have materials like elastomeric concrete or epoxy or things like that that are on your deck that are making it look unsightly. When you have material directional changes, they can be done in the factory, they can be done in the field. And then in these split slab kind of applications where you have a structural base slab and then you've got members on the surface like tile or terrazzo or concrete or whatever type of upper surface that you've got, then it's best to finish up to it as close as you can, do your installation, and then do your finish cuts to finalize your installation. Seismic joints can be really, really large. And so once you get to be larger than about 12 inches wide, then you can see in the center picture, those folks have got tie-offs connected to their person so that they do not fall into the expansion joint opening when they're doing the installation, because there's no guardrails or anything like that. They have to have access to it. So you don't want to fall in there. And there's also other mechanisms in place where you need to put things like cradles of material or straps to make sure that your materials and your tools don't fall through those gap openings as well. Because once those gaps get large, then there's a lot of safety in place that we need to make sure we take into consideration when we're installing these. We want to make sure that the weights of the materials are capable for two people to lift properly and install. And if they're not, then we need to make sure that we have equipment in place that can lower and lift and handle that weight and just be maneuvered by the installers. When you deal with fire barriers in the smaller gap openings, when you get to that 4-inch and less, most of the time you're not having to mechanically attach anything to the structure. You can just simply friction fit or put in with an epoxy or a glue or whatever the manufacturer requires in that particular application. And when they get larger, they're generally made of different materials. They're generally made of insulative blankets and some metal foil or things of those nature. And those require some splices in the field. And so you just need to follow the manufacturer's instructions. It's best if you have splices that do not require a lot of field modification. So if the splice is made from the factory, just nest together properly, and they're very, very simply put in place, that keeps it very simple for the folks in the field, which ensures that you have a good, proper installation. So you may have just a simple nesting fit and a piece of sheet metal over the top of it or something like that that seals it all up, and it's very, very easy to install and ensure that you have a good transition. So when we come to inspection, we want to look for all the different things in an expansion joint that could cause problems. And typically parking garage engineers have got a lot of criteria that they use to inspect by. But the most common standard used to inspect expansion joint applications is the ASTM E2393. That one is required as a special inspection for risk category 3 and 4 buildings, which would be a high occupancy, high importance, different kinds of things like that. There's really, other than individual engineering firms creating their own criteria, this is the most universal criteria used to inspect an expansion joint application. And in this particular case, the NFPA, the IBC, and the IFC all point to the exact same method for inspecting expansion joint covers, and that is the ASTM E2393. So all of the building codes all reference this same standard as their the go-to method for expansion joint, and especially in fire-rated applications. When you're looking at the systems themselves, you're looking for all types of things. If you're looking at an elastomeric system, then you're looking for anything that would be out of the ordinary in terms of the look from the surface of the joint. So if you're walking along and you see big spalled out areas of the elastomeric concrete, that's indicative of not just a failure of the elastomeric concrete, but it could be broken concrete down below it. So when you take a look at these, and the worse they get, that top row of pictures there are indications of obviously failures of the material. But when you peel that away, like that top right picture follows right to the lower left picture, so when you peel that seal out of there, that's all broken, and you can see exposed components, you can see down below it that the concrete is in terrible shape. It's spalled and broken, and so it's not supporting that seal in that elastomeric concrete, and so that telegraphs through the surface. So visible signs on the surface generally mean that there are some deeper issues down below, and so the remedy to that is to grind that down, clean that up, shore that, repair it with some type of structural concrete repair material, get the blockouts back to clean and level and the depth that they're supposed to be, and then you can go back in and reinstall your elastomeric sealants or seals for a good installation. Generally speaking, there are maintenance manuals that come along with any expansion joint cover manufacturer's product. So when they ship it out to you in the field, they tell you in a maintenance manual as part of your closeout documents that your elastomeric seals, for instance, you can wipe these seals clean with an organic solvent. So benzoyl, propanol, alcohol, lots of different kinds of materials can be used. Aluminum, same thing. There are cleaning instructions, mild soap, solvents, things of that nature that are used to keep these things clean and in good shape. But you always want to inspect the entirety of the system as much as possible without doing too much destructive testing. And so restoration is our final segment. When you remediate a damaged expansion joint, you have to assess it. Then you got to remove it, and then you got to replace it, right? So that sounds pretty simple, but that's where all the work's at. So take a good look at it and study it deeply first. Then you take it out, then you replace it. And so in that removal and replacement method is where you're repairing a lot of concrete and things of that nature. And so if you're doing a renovation where you're taking out a system that was already functioning, but you're renovating and repairing a new garage, you just need to make sure that you've got proper specifications in place for the product that you're selecting, and you account for any kind of lead times for both the removing of the materials and for the installation of the materials and whatever downtime you have in your garage. Parking garages are revenue generating areas, so make sure you know exactly how long you're going to be down, and if you can do work at night or weekends or whatever that is to make sure that your revenue is the least impacted as possible. So how do we correct these issues in the field when we're doing this kind of remediation work? Removal, replacement, and follow up, right? So a lot of times you have to cut out the old material. So you're cutting out elastomeric concrete, or you're cutting out a metal expansion joint cover system. You could be grinding off screws, prying up plates and things of that nature. One of the things you can do to really help your garage in this remediation process is before you start cutting and tearing out all those things, go underneath the expansion joint locations on your second, third, fourth, whatever levels right there, and you can install a gutter from below the surface of the joint. So just put an elastomeric gutter, or you could put a metal gutter, but an elastomeric gutter is going to be long and continuous and waterproof, or at least watertight. And you can run that all the way underneath the whole length of your expansion joint cover system that you're going to be remediating from above, so that you can control any debris and water and things like that that are falling down into the joint. And you could place drains in there so that you can make that water go where you want to go to. So you might be sandblasting or anything up top there where you're doing this removal and this remediation work. And so it's very, very good for you to have that. It's a very inexpensive, simple way to keep any debris or anything from work above from getting down below. This is an example of a project in Australia. It's a Coles warehouse, which is a big box store there in Australia. They had a situation where in their expansion joint plan, they really just welded a big piece of steel to a steel slab edge angle, and they used that for their expansion joint cover. And so what happened was their forklifts were driving around and pushing their pallets around and doing all that sort of thing like that. And they would catch the edge of that steel, and it flipped over two of their forklifts and injured their workers pretty badly. And so they contacted us and said, we would really like to have a solution that's flush and smooth and all that. And so in this process, we went in, did some demo removal of some segments, and then we cut out the blockouts. We repaired it with a structural repair material so that it is good and sound, and then we replaced it back in with a very sound expansion joint cover system that was flush to the surface. So they had a nice clean result at the end that they could drive their forklifts and their pallets over, and they didn't have to worry about these bumps and catching these metal plates and things of that nature. It's just part of it. Just assess the situation, look at what it takes to remedy it, and then find a solution that you're willing to work with. Make sure you have proper specifications in place. So generally speaking, the parking garage section of the master specification, master CSI specification, is 079513, subcategory 19. That subcategory 19 is specifically rated to parking garage. So that's the specification section you want to look for with a manufacturer. Warranties are most of the time 5 years or more in these kinds of applications because of the waterproofing components and the heavy abuse and things of that nature from automobile traffic and all that. Blockout repairs are very, very important. Make sure that you get all that done properly. That's in the remediation process. Again, when you remove an elastomeric seal, look at the concrete down below it, make sure you get it repaired properly. That's a good view of all that. Make sure you have good sharp 90-degree corners, that you have level blockouts. And then when you get ready to reinstall, if you have a situation like you have, this is a top deck of a parking garage in Wichita, Kansas. It was called Super Car Guys at the time. It has a Z-shaped with a blockout in it, and the wing seal is being placed in there. And factory designed miters are placed in there, or you can actually do these in the field if you want to. So they're either kind of method works just fine. You just have to make sure that you have proper instruction from the manufacturer. You can see that there's a 90-degree turn, and that seal that is bonded together there looks like not 90 degrees. There's a reason for that, because this seal in its relaxed state is wider than it is when you install it. And so the factory takes that into account, so that when you bend that into a 90-degree shape, you're at the right width of the joint and all that. So those kinds of things are taken into account by the factory as the to help prepare for the installation.
This concludes our AIA Continuing Education On-Demand presentation. On behalf of Balco and the EBS Group, thank you for your time and attention. To receive credit for this course, you'll need to complete a 10-question quiz. Simply click the test button below to get started. A passing score of 70% or higher is required. If needed, you can retake the quiz as many times as necessary to achieve a passing score. Once you pass, your AIA Certificate of Completion will be emailed to the address you provided before taking the quiz. If you're an AIA member, we'll submit your credit directly to AIA on your behalf. Please allow up to 10 business days for your credit to appear on your AIA transcript. The EBS Group offers AIA-approved courses on life safety products. Balco covers expansion joints, photoluminescent egress systems, and fire stopping. Smoke Guard focuses on fire and smoke protection solutions. And Greco offers courses on commercial architectural railings and code compliance. Scan the QR codes or visit their websites to explore all available courses. If you have any questions or would like more information on Balco, visit our website at www.balcousa.com. Thank you again for your time and interest.